Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. Happy 2023. Happy New Year. And we're kicking off this year by talking about not feeling good enough, something I can really resonate with throughout various points in my lifetime. But Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to this topic, not feeling good enough?
Yeah, so to me, I feel like there are two sort of buckets or categories, right? There is, and I've experienced both, but one is like a more pervasive, like not feeling good enough, like who I am as a person, right? Like
Yeah.
this more like sort of has in lower points of my life have was like carried with me through everything.
Right.
And then there's another version of it that's like comes out during specific things, right? So like trying out for a sports team or something and not getting it, and then not, just not feeling good enough, or even getting it. It almost doesn't necessarily matter what the outcome is, but just not feeling good enough as related to specific events. And I think sometimes there can be some overlap, but I've definitely had two distinct experiences of not feeling good enough. I'd be curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to both. I think of initially, how pervasive it's been in my life, especially in my 20s, of like it was kind of this underlying, it was kind of like running in the background, and I wasn't quite present to it until like I did a lot of personal development work to discover that was running the show and sabotaging my relationships was this underlying feeling of not good enough. And so kind of like always this concern that, oh, I'm not enough and he's gonna leave, and oh, I should be doing more, or oh, he's pulling away, so I should push harder, kind of that attitude, versus what I've discovered over time of like the internal, like, if he wants to be with me, like feeling like I'm sufficient, there's nothing I'm doing wrong. If he doesn't want to be with me for me, then that's not someone I want to be with. That type of mentality, versus I do have plenty of incidences where, like, events wise, especially I think sports is a great analogy of, like, I thought of when I was in 5th grade, I was on the basketball team, and I think they were slightly biased because I was short, but I was put in, like, they don't reject anyone for the basketball team, but they put like group A and group B, and group B doesn't actually play in the real game. They play in the 5th quarter, which is a real quarter. So there's a lot of that with sports and activities, and constantly like comparing myself, especially as like the middle child. I think that plays a role of like, ooh, I got to compare myself to what my sister's accomplishing or what my brother's accomplishing. Or just like everyone else, what they're doing. Like, I grew up as a swimmer and there was always someone better than me. So it was just like, oh, I feel like I'm not performing as well as I could be, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense in sort of the roots, right? Or what can be sort of a root cause, which is comparison with others is sort of a natural thing, but not necessarily always a helpful or useful thing. It sort of depends on the rest of the framing or mindsets that you carry with it.
Right.
And that's sort of been my experience as well, is like in those times where I felt like I wasn't good enough. It was there was a lot of like comparison with what other people were doing or what I expected myself to be able to do relative to others.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your story of like transitioning away from some of that stuff, or like what are some of the things that helped you um, to work through those feelings? Because I don't know. Actually, maybe you are still experiencing it, but maybe it has gotten better. So I'm curious.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like an ongoing journey. I think it shows up less and less. But there's some moments that from time to time, I think more sparingly than before. And it's just like, oh, when I'm feeling like defeated or depressed about something, or not feeling like I'm doing enough that shows up as, and I'm not like, I have to like, it doesn't always happen automatically. I'm like, oh, that's what's happening. I'm feeling not good enough. No, I have to like sit with it and be with it and really think like, oh, why am I so upset that, or why do I want to cry because I didn't meet this deadline, or because I feel like I'm letting this person down? Like, and it's just kind of, oh, wait, oh, this goes back to, I think it's like I know when I was a young girl, like this was a very pervasive feeling because I didn't feel like I was good enough for my parents in a lot of ways. And I didn't recognize at that age, I recognize now as an adult that was a story this little girl created, but it still shows up from time to time. So I guess how I combat it now is just soothing that like inner child and telling her, oh, actually you are enough. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And it's okay to make mistakes because that's how you grow and that's how you learn. And I just kind of, when I catch myself being really hard on myself, I think that's how it shows up a lot. It's like I'm beating myself over like something that didn't go well or not as well as I'd like to. Then I just kind of have to rein myself in and be like, oh, okay, this is the practice of being kind and gentle with myself. And that's an ongoing journey because I am constantly like beating myself because there's always like I'm striving for more and more. And of course, when you keep striving for more, then you're gonna bump up against things that are hard or difficult or challenging or uncomfortable or that you suck at. So you just have to kind of like push through it to some extent and remind yourself that this is part of the process. You are enough. You are exactly where you need to be in this exact moment. And that's okay.
Yeah, so I heard sort of a chain, like a link to sort of the perfectionism to a degree. I don't know if you
Yeah.
agree with that or not, but
Oh, definitely.
that's part of what I heard is sort of this like perfectionistic mindset, and I'd be curious because it's a lot of what I experienced as well, which is my expectations are like I felt not good enough most often when my expectations aren't realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Around things like you were saying, like for example, like, oh, this needs to be perfect, and then it's
Mhm.
not, so there's something wrong with me. Or like I wasn't able to make this thing, so or like accomplish this task, so I'm not good enough.
Mhm.
I have some strategies or things that I've used to
Yeah,
sort
I'm
of
curious to
more
hear
tightly
those.
link those things together. But so one of the main things that has worked for me is just recognizing relative amounts of effort and time people have put into things. Right. That was
Mhm.
one of my biggest problems of not feeling good enough is I would
Right.
try or do something
Mm-hmm.
and put in whatever amount of effort and then be frustrated that I wasn't up to par with somebody else
Right.
or able to accomplish a certain thing. Like um and often if I was to actually sit down and think about or get a good sense of what the other person was doing to
Mm-hmm.
get to that point, as I've gotten more and more realistic or more aware around some of those things,
Mm-hmm.
it's been easier for me to let go some of those other feelings, right? So, for example, if I see someone who's better than me, or like let's say they're in better shape,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, switching to more of like a control frame where I've realized like, oh, I have control over my actions, and this person has done all of these things
Mm-hmm.
to try to reach their fitness goals.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I still have a little bit of problems around like, well, why is my discipline better? But I feel a lot more empowered around like I am capable of making all those choices. Like if that's the outcome I want,
Yeah.
I'm capable of doing all those things too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's helped me make a lot of progress around not being as stuck up on not feeling good enough. Just because to me, I see so much more clearly what the sort of decision landscape looks like, right? Like it's this
Yeah.
big, broad thing. And in the past, I've picked out little like, oh, this person went all the way to this extreme on this path, and I'm not the same as them, so there's something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's something that's helped me a lot. I'd be curious if there are things like that that have helped you.
Yeah, definitely, in regards to fitness, I kind of stopped comparing myself to others because there's definitely people that are in way better shape and able to like lift more or run faster. And that's just generally always the case, but it's more, and it's it's particularly annoying. What gets me is like when like a 20-something-year-old just like starts from square one and I'm like way ahead of them, but then 2 months in and they're like, and I'm just like, I have to remind myself that I'm not in my 20s and that's okay. I wish I started in my 20s, but I didn't. I started where I am. It's better than starting in my 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s. So better late than never. And it is what it is. And it's just more about competing with myself in a way, trying to like exceed my last like lift or run time or whatever that might be. Although that can be a little of a slippery slope that I think about it if you're constantly comparing yourself to like a previous version of yourself. But the other thing that I thought of when you were talking about comparison, I was thinking of like when I was in med school and, you were talking about like time frame, like, obviously someone who's been doing X like 5 times longer than you is probably going to be better at you than that, most likely. But I remember in med school, like I felt like I was studying way harder than most people. Like I was putting in way more hours studying than some people. Like I had friends that just like study for a few hours and they got like an 80 on their test and I got like a 60 and I was just like, what is going on? And it took some time for me to like figure out my learning style and what was more effective, to be more proactive in learning rather than passive in learning made the difference. And that was a learning curve. So it's not necessarily like time. It's about like efficiency too can make a difference. And there's ways to get better at that with, guidance or friends that support you and, you learn from their methods or teachers or coaches or whoever that might be.
Yeah, I think you bring up a couple really important points, and it's a little bit of a cliche at this point, but it really is important to focus on your own
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah.
The more that you focus in on what other people are doing as a method of comparison instead of a way to learn, because like you're saying, you can look at sort of what other people are doing and they may be finding success faster than you at particular things, right? And like you said, it may not just be a time and experience issue, it may be a strategy issue.
Yeah.
And it can be really useful to look at what other people are doing because sometimes they have just better strategies for accomplishing whatever the thing is.
Right.
And if you use those same things, they can be just as effective. Or like you were saying, it could be that, for example, you were studying one way and you said you found better ways to study. You particularly might need a different set of strategies than someone else who's successful with whatever rote memorization type like thing.
Yeah, maybe they have a photographic memory and I can't compete with that.
Yeah, so that's why I just think it's important to like balance all of those inputs, and that's probably why it's so hard, especially when you're younger, to sort of fight off some of these feelings or thoughts, because it takes time to really recognize all these different inputs that even exist, and then even more time to like sort of work through them and realize like, okay, well, I can look at other people to see what they're doing, but I don't want to compare myself too tightly, but my brain sort of naturally does that immediately. So there's like a bit of nuance playing around in how you can sort of use all of these factors together in a way that's most efficient for you without sort of, like we've been talking about, not feeling good enough to keep up or compete or whatever else.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious though, like when you find yourself beating yourself up, are there any things that you like say to yourself to kind of like get out of that mindset, or what helped you in particular?
So this was, and I mentioned it a little bit before, but this was a muscle I had to build up, right? This was not, that comes a lot more naturally to me now, but this has not always been the case.
Yeah.
Now, when I'm starting to feel down or beat up or not good enough about something, I try to really move into the things that are in my control and the things that matter. So here's one key thing that's switched for me is a lot of times I would find myself not feeling good enough or just beating myself up around something like, let's say when I switched careers, right?
Yeah.
Oh, all these other people are ahead of me.
Yeah.
One thing that's helped a lot is recognizing that doesn't matter. It's not important at all where I am relative to somebody else on this career trajectory.
Right.
Now, there was times that I was so bought in, I'm just like, right, but I'm 26, this guy's 26, he's a level above me. Like, I hate this. This is so frustrating.
Yeah.
So as I've gotten better at sort of fighting that mindset, or like arguing with it, right? I've gotten better at seeing things like, okay, but this person started their career many, many years before I did.
Right.
Okay, why do I care? Why do I care about this? Like, how is this important to my life?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not? Like, and it may sound kind of trite and dumb, but those sorts of realizations, or just forcing myself to consciously think about that and ask myself why I care about it, has helped in a lot of circumstances for me to just be like, okay, I guess that's just a program, you know, my brain or subconscious or whatever is running to just chirp like, oh, this person, when it actually isn't impacting my life. So that's another thing that's helped a lot, is focusing more towards what impacts my quality of life and happiness. And that has allowed me to quiet those voices a little bit.
Yeah. No, I love those strategies. Definitely can make the difference. I'm trying to think of other things that I do for myself when I'm not feeling good enough. I think it's just a lot of just self-compassion. I think one of the things I mentioned, the like kind of seeing my little Alice in a way, I think helps me have a little more compassion. It's like if you saw a little kid beating themselves up, being like, I'm so stupid, or I'm so dumb, or oh, yeah, no, it's just, you wouldn't be like, yeah, you are. You would probably try to comfort and soothe that child. So I just kind of like try to see myself in that light. And because I think I'm able to kind of give more compassion for that kid, a kid, than an adult. I don't know why. But that just seems to be the case. So it's easier. They're more innocent, I guess. So that's, and some of the key like phrases one of my therapists had given me was like, you know, saying things like, oh, I am enough is one of them, but also like, I am lovable, I didn't do anything wrong, or I forget the other one, but things like that, like things to like reassure that, you know, you're on the right path, you're doing what you can, you are enough. Sometimes it doesn't always work out as well as we'd like, and that's where we try again. And I think I want to like, the big thing actually, what I thought of is like really important, is distinguishing the difference between I'm not enough versus the action I took wasn't enough. That is very different. And I think that when you can separate out that and not internalize it, it was like, I'm bad, I'm not enough, that makes the difference. And then you can just focus on the action, because yeah, there's plenty of times where the action I took wasn't enough to get the result that I wanted, and that's okay. But it's just like, okay, it's an opportunity for me to look at like, what else can I do to have a more effective action next time?
Yeah, there's several things that came up as you were speaking. The first one I want to touch on is, like you mentioned a little bit, sort of how you view yourself, or like how you view, you know, like if a child was not feeling good.
Right.
And it made me think of, socially, these things matter a lot, like who you have around you, right? Like the types of messages you're receiving from other people. And like that's one thing that's helped me a lot, is as I've gotten older, I've moved away from people who are sort of reinforcing these messages of like, you're never going to be good enough to do that, you're not a good person,
Right.
those kinds of things, whether or not they mean it.
Yeah.
You know, people can communicate that way, and it's not that uncommon. So that's one piece. Another piece, like you were saying, that I think is important, is as much as possible divorcing your worth from your actions and outcomes. Because one thing that I've been guilty of, and I imagine traps other people too, is getting so focused on a particular path or outcome where those things may not have been realistic for me. And by that I mean something like, you know, I had this idea for forever of like, oh, I want to have a really big successful business. And as I've gotten older, a bunch of different pieces come into play, but one is, that's not something that I need to be happy or feel good, right? That's like something that I singled out as important, but it really hasn't been.
Right.
Two, sort of the idea that I had in my mind, or the path that I wanted for it,
Mhm.
was not realistic on the timeline that I had set for myself, at least relative to the actions I was taking.
Mhm.
So combining sort of some of those pieces together has allowed me to move away again from this like not feeling good enough
Yeah.
piece and towards sort of what we talked about, just like what's realistic, what actions am I taking, and the more I go into that mindset, the further away I get from judging myself as opposed to, like you said, just the
Mm.
actions.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think kind of what I was hearing underneath it all, like kind of reevaluate, and we've talked about this plenty on various episodes, is like reevaluating your values and your priorities of like what matters. And it's like, is this really going to bring me happiness and joy in my life? And is it like, am I willing to exert the sufficient amount of effort required to do so? And sometimes that's not the case, and that's okay, because maybe that won't bring you the happiness and joy that you're looking for. Yeah.
And on a related note, I think it's important to remain flexible mentally, right?
Definitely.
Because so much of this kind of stuff in my life has come
Mm,
from being very rigid in the sort of outcomes I think that I need, or
yeah.
very rigid in, um, like there was a long time that I thought you have to make six figures to have a decent life. You have to.
Yeah.
And it didn't take very long for that to sort of dissolve once I started making money and paying all my bills and stuff. But there were times when I was making like a lot less money that I would let this sort of thinking creep in of like, oh, I'm not good enough.
Hmm.
And it's just sort of weird because it's not even it wasn't even connected to any of the outcomes I cared about. So it took like active effort of over and over again whenever those like, oh, I'm not good enough to do X, Y, and Z, like
Hmm.
fighting against like, okay, first of all, I haven't taken the right actions for it. And second of all, even if I do and I get this thing,
Yeah.
that's not what's important for my quality of life.
Yeah. Totally. Very, very important points that you made. Yeah. All right. Well, is there any other things that you wanted to cover before we wrap up for today?
I think that's pretty much it. Like I said, I just want to hammer on, highlight again, like the people that are around you, the messages you receive around you
Mhm.
make a big difference for how hard this can be. Because I know at a
Yeah.
different time in my life, I was trying to do some of these
Hmm.
mental exercises to sort of work through some of this stuff, but the people around me were communicating in ways that were not helpful. And those messages get internalized more than I thought. And it takes a lot more effort when the people around you are not on the same page. So
Yeah.
just want to highlight that because it's not the only thing, but it is one of the more important things that I needed to change.
Hmm. Yeah, that's actually a really good point you made, because growing up, I think it's just part of Asian culture. It's like, you get reprimanded for getting like a B or C. It's like that's not enough. A is like what you got to strive for, and if you don't, then you're just less than. And then even if you do get the A's, you're not like celebrated. You're just like you did your job. Kind of thing. So you're only like punished if you get less than that. And so living in that type of environment, and it's just, not my parents' fault. It's kind of just what they grew up with. So it's generational to some degree. To recognize that, like, hey, it's like the grade, I mean, yes, you do need to pass to get to the next level to some degree, but at the end of the day, it's like when you're in the real world, those grades don't actually matter. And it's like, did you do your best? That's, I think, a more important value to measure versus like, did I get an A? Did I get every question right 100%? Because, life is not always going to be perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah, and attached to that, there are
Mhm.
many different paths to
Yeah.
a happy and successful life.
Yeah.
Success being the way that you measure it and what you actually want out of it,
Right.
as opposed to, the socially inclined
Hmm.
idea of success.
Right.
So yeah, getting stuck on again something like grades that
Mhm.
they can be important depending on what path you're trying to take and
True.
what you care about, but getting completely focused on that as opposed to just looking for what is a path to like success and happiness that can work for
Mhm.
you
Right.
is not going to be quite as fruitful.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, that covers it for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.